the sky was bleeding purple that evening. Not the kind of dusk you pause to admire, the kind that makes cattle restless and dogs refuse to howl. He was on the porch. As always. One hand resting on a chipped glass of rye, the other on the old rifle across his knees. Not aiming to use it, just habit. Like a man who's seen enough to know peace is a luxury and silence is rarely harmless. He saw her coming before she stepped through the gate. Riding slow, almost respectful. Horse limping. Rider sitting straight as a coffin plank. Dust clung to her like a second skin, and though her face was hidden beneath the wide brim of her hat, something about the way she moved made his spine stiffen. She stopped 5 paces out. Said nothing for a long while. He could hear the wind pushing against the shutters. A crow cackling somewhere behind the barn. His own heartbeat in his ears. Then she reached down. Pulled a sack from the saddle. Canvas. Heavy. Stained dark in places where no water had spilled. She walked up slow, boots dragging grit behind her like a trail of regrets. Dropped it at his feet. Didn't flinch. Didn't explain. Then finally, her voice, low, worn, but clear as ice-cutting glass, "Please, take them off." She didn't wait for a reply. Just turned and walked away. Back through the wind, into the dying light. He stared at the sack. Didn't want to touch it. Didn't want to remember what it might mean. But his hands moved anyway. Knees creaked as he crouched, the canvas was rough. Still warm from the horse. He undid the drawstring, slow. The moment the sack opened. The breath left his body. He reached inside and lifted one object. Metal. Cold. Familiar. Bent at the edge. A badge. Then another. And another. 5 in total. Blood on one. A bullet lodged in the second. Each with a name he'd once spoken around campfires. Men who'd laughed too loud and died too slow. He dropped the last one back in like it burned. Staggered to his feet. No storm had arrived yet, but the sky felt closer than before, like it was leaning in, listening. Narrator, some say she rode for justice. Others said it was vengeance. But the truth? The truth is, the West was never the same after she came back. He reached inside and lifted one object. Metal. Cold. Familiar. Bent at the edge. A badge. Then another. And another. 5 in total. Blood on one. A bullet lodged in the second. Each with a name he'd once spoken around campfires. Men who'd laughed too loud and died too slow. He dropped the last one back in like it burned. Staggered to his feet. No storm had arrived yet, but the sky felt closer than before, like it was leaning in, listening. The wind was the first to greet her. It carried grit sharp enough to sting the skin and scraps of old newsprint that clung to her boots before skittering away again. Somewhere, a dog barked once, high, short, then went quiet like it remembered who ruled these streets. She didn't hurry. Folks who hurry are either running from something or running toward it, and she wanted no one here to know which she was. Her pace was steady, almost casual, but her eyes worked harder than her feet. The town wasn't much. A bent row of buildings holding themselves up out of habit more than pride. The paint on the saloon sign had given up long ago, leaving only faint letters in the wood like the ghost of a name. The sheriff's office leaned in the wind as if tired of standing. Every building here seemed tired. Her steps echoed in the hollow space between storefronts. Shadows moved where they shouldn't have, behind the lace curtains of the boarding house, behind the cracked glass of the general store. She felt them watching, measuring her, weighing her worth against whatever danger they thought she carried. 2 men leaned outside the sheriff's office. Badges on their chests caught the sun like sharp flashes of steel. They had the look of men who could break the law just as easily as they could quote it. One chewed on a toothpick. The other smiled at her, a slow, knowing curl of the lip that promised trouble. She kept walking. The street was long enough to let her feel every eye, every breath held behind every shutter. Whispers traveled faster than her boots. By the time she passed the saloon, half the town already knew she'd arrived. The saloon doors moved without a sound. A card dealer stopped mid-shuffle to look at her, one eyebrow rising like he'd just been dealt the kind of hand you don't know whether to play or throw away. The bartender stood in the shadows, polishing a glass that didn't need polishing, watching her as if she was already halfway to being a memory. She stepped past them, past the smell of stale whiskey and dust, out the other side of town where the buildings thinned and the road split in two. One track led to the hills, the other to the open desert. She stopped. Turned her head just enough to catch the reflection of the sheriff's men still watching from across the street. They hadn't moved. Didn't need to. She wasn't here for them. She wasn't here for the folks who pretended not to see her, or the ones brave enough to look. She was here to settle something. Something that had been waiting a long time to be settled. And if she found it, this street would not look the same by sundown. They say she wasn't always this way. Once, her voice carried laughter that made folks turn their heads just to hear it. Once, her boots carried her light as if the ground itself welcomed her. She worked the land with steady hands, never looking for trouble, never asking for more than what she could earn. But all that was before the night the world shifted under her feet. It didn't happen in a fair fight. It didn't even happen face to face. It was the work of cowards, the kind that hide behind shadows and call it law. The night air was still, moonlight lying flat across the fields. Then came the first gunshot, sharp enough to tear the silence in half. A second. A third. A scream that began in the heart and never had the chance to finish. When she ran toward the sound, she found him there, the only soul she trusted with all her truths, lying in the dirt, eyes open, chest still, heat leaving his body faster than she could kneel beside him. The men who stood over him didn't run. They didn't hide. They looked at her the way men look at something they believe they own. Their badges caught the moonlight. Their smiles cut deeper than any bullet could. The town said it was a misunderstanding, a warning gone wrong. Said he had been in the wrong place, said she should understand. But bad luck doesn't walk away laughing. And men who kill in the dark rarely stay in the dark forever. She didn't scream. Didn't weep where they could see. She just stood there, staring at the dirt beneath him, memorizing the way their boots pressed into it. By morning, she was gone. Some said she went east, to family who would hide her until it was safe. Some said she wandered into the hills, looking for a place where the memory couldn't find her. Others swore she was dead, taken by the same silence that swallows so many in these parts. The truth? No one knew. And that's what made the stories grow. Because one day, months later, she came back. She didn't ride in with guns blazing. She didn't speak of what had happened. She came back quieter, colder, like someone who had bargained with the dark and gotten the better end of it. Her eyes didn't rest on people anymore. They looked through them, as if weighing something only she understood. And soon, people noticed a pattern. Wherever she passed, someone would disappear. Not the drunks. Not the thieves who stole bread because they were hungry. No, it was always men with a past. Men whose names had been spoken in courtrooms but never written on any charge. Men who could tip their hats to the sheriff and walk free no matter what they'd done. Sometimes it was a ranch foreman who liked to settle debts with his fists. Sometimes it was a deputy who'd been too quick with his trigger in the back alleys. Sometimes it was a man who had worn a uniform, then worn out his welcome. They'd vanish without a word, without a trace, just dust on the wind and a story left behind. The townsfolk called it coincidence. The law called it unsolved. But the whispers gave it another name. They said she was a shadow carrying justice in her saddlebag. Not the kind handed down from a judge in a clean shirt, the kind taken when the law has failed, the kind carved into the dirt with your own hands. She wasn't hunting. No. She was delivering. One badge. One bullet. One man at a time. And every mile she rode brought her closer to the last name on her list. Sometimes it was a ranch foreman who liked to settle debts with his fists. Sometimes it was a deputy who'd been too quick with his trigger in the back alleys. Sometimes it was a man who had worn a uniform, then worn out his welcome. They'd vanish without a word, without a trace, just dust on the wind and a story left behind. The townsfolk called it coincidence. The law called it unsolved. But the whispers gave it another name. They said she was a shadow carrying justice in her saddlebag. Not the kind handed down from a judge in a clean shirt, the kind taken when the law has failed, the kind carved into the dirt with your own hands. She wasn't hunting. No. She was delivering. One badge. One bullet. One man at a time. And every mile she rode brought her closer to the last name on her list. Back at the ranch, the air is still, heavy with the scent of rain that never comes. The man who took her in years ago sits at the table, his hands gnarled and cracked like dry earth. On the wood in front of him rests a small sack, rough canvas, stained, tied with a leather cord. He stares at it for a long while before touching it, as if the weight inside is heavier than the world itself. He doesn't need to open it. He knows what it means. Still, his fingers fumble with the knot, slow, reluctant. When the cord slips loose, the contents spill with a dull, sickening clink. 5 law badges, bent. Bloodied. Blackened with age and fire. His throat tightens. He once shook the hands that wore them. Once shared whiskey with those men. She's not just passing through, he mutters, voice low, almost afraid the walls might hear. She's closing the circle. The badges lay there like ghosts, staring back at him. The edges are scorched, the metal warped, the kind of damage you don't get from a fair fight. He can almost smell the gunpowder still clinging to them. He leans back in his chair, eyes darting toward the window, half expecting to see her there, standing in the dust. But the yard is empty. The wind rattles the shutters. He thinks about the men those badges belong to, men who didn't just keep the law, they twisted it, bent it until it broke. Men who smiled in the daylight and did their real work in the dark. He remembers, and with each memory, the shame in his gut grows heavier. Because here's the truth, the part he's never spoken aloud, he's tied to them. Maybe by blood, a cousin in uniform, a brother in arms. Maybe by silence, when he could have spoken up. Maybe he looked the other way when the wrong people got hurt. Back then, it seemed easier. Safer. The world kept turning, the ranch stayed standing, and the dead stayed buried. Or so he thought. But she knows. Somehow, she's always known. He feels it in his bones, she didn't bring those badges here for show, she brought them to remind him of the weight he's carried, and to make him choose what side he's really on. The knot in his chest is tighter than the one he untied. He hears boots crunching in the dirt outside. Slow. Measured. Coming closer. He doesn't turn toward the door, but he doesn't have to. The sound stops just beyond the threshold. The air changes, thickens, like the moments before a storm splits the sky. A shadow cuts across the gap under the door. He knows she's standing there. Watching. Waiting for him to speak first. His hand hovers over the badges, then clenches into a fist. "What do you want from me?" he says at last, but his voice cracks, more plea than challenge. Silence answers. Then the door creaks, just enough for the dust outside to drift in. A single word slips through, not loud, not threatening, but certain. And in that word, he hears the truth, she isn't here for revenge alone. She's here for judgment. The sun is low, spilling rust-red light across Rustwater's empty street. Every window is shut. Every curtain pulled tight. The only sound is her boots, steady, measured, cutting through the dust like the slow ticking of a clock running out of time. Ahead, the sheriff's office waits, its wooden sign swaying on frayed rope. Inside, the new law sits in the dark, polished guns gleaming, eyes like iron. They've been expecting her. They think they're ready. She doesn't slow. Doesn't look left or right. Her shadow stretches long across the boards as she pushes the door open. It creaks like it's warning her, or maybe warning them. 5 men rise from their chairs when she enters. The air smells of oil and metal, of whiskey that's gone bitter. The sheriff, young, sharp, the kind who thinks a badge makes him untouchable, tips his hat without a smile. "You remember the others?" she asks, her voice low, almost calm. A smirk tugs at his mouth. "They were fools. You're not like them." Her eyes never leave his. "No," she says. "I'm worse." The room stills. The clock on the wall ticks once, twice, then stops, as if even time knows what's coming. The first gunshot isn't hers, but the second is. Wood splinters, glass shatters, and the room explodes into chaos. They move fast, but she's faster. Her coat flares with each turn, each squeeze of the trigger. Gunfire roars in the cramped space, deafening, choking the air with smoke. A deputy lunges from the side, a flash of teeth, the glint of steel, but drops before he can reach her. Another tries to run for the door. She cuts him down without looking. The sheriff fires blind through the haze, cursing, coughing, but his bullets find only shadows. Then there's silence, broken only by the crackle of flames. She stands alone now, breath steady, the weight of her revolver still warm in her hand. The fire she set in the corner licks its way up the walls, turning old papers and wanted posters into drifting ash. At her feet lies the last badge, polished, untouched, until now. She kicks it into the flames, watching as the heat warps its shape, blackens the shine. There's no triumph in her eyes. No relief. Justice wasn't served here tonight. It was taken, by her hand, and there's no one left to question the cost. The first light of morning spills over Rustwater Flats, brushing the charred shell of the sheriff's office in gold. Smoke still curls from blackened beams, drifting up into a sky scrubbed clean by the night's violence. Out past the edge of town, the rancher rides slow, an old canvas sack bouncing against his saddle. He doesn't hurry, no one does after a night like that. When he reaches the split-rail fence, he swings down without a word, boots crunching on frost-hardened earth. He pulls open the sack. 6 badges now. Bent. Burned. Silent. The metal is cold, but the weight of them is heavier than any bullet he's ever carried. One by one, he drives them into the wood, hammer blows echoing across the empty plain. 5 bent from the past, 1 fresh from last night, still smelling faintly of smoke. The fence post leans slightly, like it's burdened by the truth it holds. The rancher wipes his brow, steps back, and looks at the row of tarnished stars. "Some ride for money," he mutters, voice low, meant for no one but the wind. "Some for blood." She rode for something harder to name. His eyes drift toward the horizon, where the land swallows the sky in a pale haze. She's gone. No tracks worth following. No one saw her leave, but everyone knows she's not here. In the saloon, whispers already start, about the fire, about the gunfight, about the look in her eyes when she stepped out of the smoke. Old men lean in close to tell it, young ones hang on the words, each retelling sharpening her into something more than flesh and bone. By noon, she's a story. By night, she's a warning. And by tomorrow, she'll be a legend. The rancher saddles up again, but his eyes linger on the badges one last time. The morning sun catches on them, making the battered metal flare with brief light before dulling again. Somewhere far ahead, she rides, coat snapping in the wind, face unreadable. A voice, maybe his, maybe ours, threads through the image, quiet but certain, that wasn't the last time she rode into the fire. The screen holds on the empty horizon a beat too long, until the faint sound of hoofs rises, distant but steady, and the wind carries it away. Subscribe for more forgotten stories of the women who changed the West. Was she justice, or just another ghost in the dust?